Fire has been seen as a weapon of terror on the battlefield since ancient times. The most famous of these deployments being Greek fire, an ancient-style flamethrower that burned on water and could destroy entire enemy navies in a single engagement, or so the legend goes. Use of such a weapon was even threatened during the Civil War, although it was never actually used. The recipe for Greek fire is long gone, although several cheap imitations did exist before the modern equivalent of napalm was invented. It wasn't until the early 1900s that the modern flamethrower was born, and like many of the new inventions of war, was quickly experimented on to no end. By now, many of you may have heard about the Nazi invention of placing flamethrowers on their aircraft as a means of bomber defense. Military aviation history made a video highlighting this very subject that I highly recommend watching, and you can find a link to it in the description. However, by the time such a weapon was deployed in 1939, the idea was already an old one, and shown to be ineffective. The war wasn't even 6 months old when, in September of 1914, one Matthias Erzberger, a member of the Reichstag, and representative of Germany during the Treaty of Versailles, sent a letter to Falkenhayn recommending the attachment of flamethrowers to zeppelins in order to quite literally terrorize British civilians. Your Excellency will allow me to submit herewith a memorandum concerning a flamethrower invented by Herr Fiedler. The matter is already known to Your Excellency, but I consider the further suggestion to make use of the new invention from airships to be a very happy one. All considerations of international law and humanity, which were all very well in times of peace as a subject for conversation in the saloons of Berlin, must now, in my opinion, be absolutely discarded. We must gain victory also over England, and I believe this invention is eminently calculated to realize precisely this aim. While the picture in one's head of a flame-spewing zeppelin is an incredible one, the idea appears to have been quickly shot down, as the dangers of having flamethrowers aboard hydrogen zeppelins would be obvious to anyone who wasn't Matthias Erzberger. Shortly after, on October 5th, 1914, the first use of flamethrowers occurred at Bagatelle Pavillon in the Argonne. I'm going to have to apologize here for my poor pronunciation of French. I am trying to improve, but for now, you'll just have to bear with me. The unsuccessful attempt by Pionnier Bataillon No. 29 would teach valuable lessons and result in massive improvements only 5 months later. On February 26, 1915, the Germans used the flamethrower for the first successful time during the Battle of Verdun. Shortly afterward, it was used in concerted action against the British positions near Hooge. This immediately inspired one Canadian, a Mr. Osborne, to make and affix such a device to the rudder of a Royal Aircraft Factory FE-8, and was convinced it would change the outcome of the war. A part of the British 40 Squadron, he had earned himself the nickname of the Gadget King due to his, reportedly, multitude of inventions. His claims of his new device, along with his reputation, convinced Major Robert Lorraine to have higher-ups within the British military view his new aerial flamethrower. It quickly became apparent that the claims of being able to burn any German fighter that was on his tail were over-exaggerated at best, as the official report notes only seeing small balls of bluish smoke, and nothing more. Such an invention would not be attempted for another several years, and ended up being several attempts all at once. On February 15, 1918, brothers Richard and Robert Bunge submitted German patent number 325694 for what they named Flammenwerfer für Flugzeuge, or flamethrower for aircraft. Not exactly the most creative name in the world. While it's not known as to the extent in which this flamethrower system was tested or even used, it bears a striking resemblance to the one used by Germany in limited numbers during World War II. However, by March of 1918, both Sturmbataillon 16 and Fliegerabteilung 223 were recording their own experiments with such a device, and it's likely they used the Bunge patent at first, although they quickly switched their deployment to the first successful use of an aerial flamethrower. On March 4th, a specially modified AEG-J type air armored biplane took off from its base somewhere around Spielberg and ran the first successful photograph test of a flamethrower mounted on an airplane. This is still the only such photo that has been found of such a device during or before the First World War. The only reason one can think of for the choice of the AEG-J aircraft over others seems to stem from its design. It had armor added around the engine and crew areas of the aircraft, and had a mounting area in the rear built to support two forward-facing machine guns that angled downward at 45 degrees. which would be used to fire upon enemy troops in the trenches below. So it appears they simply swapped out the machine guns with a flamethrower, more than likely the common Wex flamethrower. But it could have also been the lesser used M16, or even more likely, one that was custom made for this deployment. Without any further documentation, it's impossible to really tell. While it remains unknown if these were used during the later spring offensive, as there are no real records to be found, an eyewitness account of these aircraft was written down by one Frank Washington of the 371st Infantry Regiment, after being wounded while fighting in Champagne during the September offensive of 1918. It was all bad, but the worst came when the German airplanes flew low and sprayed the wounded with liquid fire. There is no way of putting out that liquid flame, and no one can help you, because the fire spreads so quickly. It is bad enough to be helpless out there without water or friends, but to have a hell fiend fly over and just squirt torture at you? Well, the Indians or the savages of Africa were not much worse. They were not so bad, in fact, for they were savages, while the Germans are supposed to be civilized. A Hun plane flew over when I was wounded, but believe me, when I saw that fire coming, I sure did some lively hopping around. There wasn't going to be any broiled Washington if I could help it, but some of the mortally wounded were burned to death. Those Huns should be made to pay for that sort of thing. It ain't fighting. It's concentrated hell. It remains unknown just how extensively these were used. It is, however, possible the 371st shot down one of these aircraft, as the regiment was awarded multiple aerial kills around the same time, and the AEG Type J armored biplane was notoriously easy to take down. However, it is not known and very unlikely, and these aircraft were probably only used in small amounts late in the war due to desperation more than anything. If they were seen as actual practical tools for warfare, then they would have been used during the spring offensive, and it would have been massively over-reported on, much like the MP-18 and A-7V. The last known attempt at mounting a flamethrower to an aircraft was done by the French in cooperation with the Belgians in May of 1918. They had been running tests and designing a proper mounting solution for several months before the final test and eventual scrapping of the project. As with other examples, there is very little information except for a small writing about the experiments found in a book published in France in 1920. The problem of using airplanes equipped with flamethrowers for the purpose of setting fire to the enemy's aviation hangars had also been considered. Tests were made at the Belgian aerodrome in May of 1918. The P-3 flamethrowers were tested on airplanes placed on the ground, the propellers being placed in operation. A P-3 flamethrower was placed exactly in line of projection of the axis of the propeller, maximum wind. The jets were ignited irregularly, for the oil was thrown on the fuse, whence the poor ignition and failure to ignite. The experiment was repeated, and a sort of tight trumpet was placed between the cock and the support holding the fuse, and covering the whole fuse. Through the hole made in the base, the fuse could be ignited. The ignition was well performed, without any failures. The range of the jet was about 25 meters or so, but the liquid was atomized to a considerable extent, and the flamethrower was rapidly emptied. The lack of any major information regarding these tests and deployments is rather interesting. Such dangerous experiments and even combat use for such a novel weapon, and there's hardly more than a couple paragraphs written about the total combined experiences of every nation to toy with such a weapon between 1914 and 1918. There is, of course, the chance that many of the German documents regarding Sturmbataillon 16's experiments were either destroyed or have yet to be properly found or recorded. But even eyewitness accounts of their use in battle being kept to only one entry, saved only thanks to tremendous amounts of effort, leaves a lot to be desired. This episode is the first in an upcoming weekly series that I'm starting, with this one, that will hopefully be continued for the next couple years. Each week I will be talking about a subject or an aircraft or an airship from the dawn of aviation between the 1800s and the end of World War I. This subject of aerial flamethrowers during World War I was brought to my attention by someone who was part of the Discord server for this channel. And it was a very interesting read-through. I really enjoyed writing the script and doing all this research, even if it continued to lead me to new dead ends whenever I thought I had a breakthrough. However, it was extremely fun to do, and I'm very glad that I had the chance to really talk about a subject no one's really gone into a lot of detail about. I appreciate the research done by various individuals long before I have that made this video possible, and I'll go ahead and put the sources, if I can remember to, in the description below, along with links to where I got most of my information. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like and share. and leave a comment about it. And if you want to keep up with the future aerial videos, definitely subscribe, as I will be releasing these more regularly on a weekly basis every single weekend.